The podcast at kcaaradio.com.
KCAA.
Do you believe in a God that satisfies? Do you believe in a God that opens eyes? Do you believe in a God that tells you lies? Or do you believe in me? Do you believe in a God that brings you down? Do you believe in a God that wears the ground? Do you believe in a God that makes you bow? Or do you believe in me? Do you believe in a God that satisfies? Do you believe in a God that opens eyes? Do you believe in a God that tells you lies? Or do you believe in me? Do you believe in a God that brings you down? Do you believe in a God that wears the ground? Do you believe in a God that makes you bow? Or do you believe in me?
It's beyond common sense. It's Lanny Sense with Lanny Swerdlow, KCAA's resident gay, woke, liberal, pot-smoking, race-mixing, tree-hugging, left-handed, science-affirming, Jewish, humanist, atheist, a white evangelical Christian nationalist, worst nightmare. Hey, welcome to today's edition of Lanny Sense. That's right, a white Christian nationalist worst nightmare. They wake up screaming after they hear me. Anyway, so hey, thank you for joining the show tonight. We have a great show tonight featuring Dr. Jamie Woods about transgenderism, and we're going to be taking a look at transgender athletes and so on. But first, remember, you notice we're on a new time now. We're at 7 p.m. every Tuesday at 7 p.m. And since some people probably don't know that, and they're going to tune in at 8 p.m. to listen to the show, we're going to repeat this show again tonight at 8 p.m. So if you really like it, kick back, relax, and you can listen to it all over again at 8 p.m. But from now on, Lanny Sense is on every Tuesday at 7 p.m. on KCAA Radio. Okay, I want to let you know about something that I hope will incense you enough to come on down and get involved. There is an event in Temecula on May 22nd, sponsored by the IE Family PAC, that will further the polarization of our communities at the expense of our children. Trying to monopolize the loaded term parental rights, their goal is to take control of our community school boards and turn our children's education into a cultural battleground. Parental rights belongs to the parents of all children in our community, not just the few who have the power and money to force and bully their way into our children's lives. They want to ban books from our schools and restrict course content that will deny our children the information they need to understand the diversity that makes our country strong. They seek to override the judgment of our teachers and librarians and censor course content claiming that information on slavery, the genocide of Native Americans, and the contributions that non-European immigrants have made to our country will make their children uncomfortable. Their vision of parental rights is to enshrine and elevate their own parental rights above all others. The rights of other parents to have their children taught in a safe and welcoming environment is anathema to them. The IE Family PAC event is just one local example of the Republican Party's parental rights smoke and mirrors flim-flam, featuring MAGA Republican extraordinaire Eric Trump as their main speaker and several other national and local Republican extremist figures. It is totally a stealth event for the Republican Party to raise money to regain control of Riverside County, which was formerly a Republican stronghold, but is now a county with a Democratic majority. With ticket prices ranging from $200 to $1,000, it is not aimed at reaching out to ordinary citizens, but specifically designed to raise money from wealthy Republicans to conduct an election onslaught to elect Republicans to local offices, including nonpartisan offices like school boards, water boards, and health agencies. So, there is going to be a protest rally staged at the event on Wednesday, May 22nd. We're going to start the rally at 4:30 p.m. A lot of organizations have joined in and are going to be coming there. It starts at 4:30 p.m. It's going to be in Temecula at the Temecula Stampede. That's in Old Town Temecula. The address is 28721 Old Town Front Street in Temecula. So I'll talk about it next week, because next week we're going to be here on the 21st, and I'll bring you up to date on this. But mark it on your calendars now. This is a hate group. A hate group. Hey, let me read you from their website. Taking back the school board is critical, it says. And it says, here are the problem in schools. This is what they identify as the problem in our schools. Growing indoctrination, critical race theory, state mandates like school health programs, transgenderism encouraged, forced LGBTQ plus acceptance, perverted sexual training. This is on their website. You can see it. Go to iefamilypack.org. You can see this hate being spewed by them, and it's being endorsed and being run by the Republican Party, and they're holding this big fundraiser to raise lots of money, so they can put these right-wing extremists on our school boards and indoctrinate our children with their hate. So let's show them that we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. And come on down on Wednesday, May 22nd, to Old Town Temecula, to the Temecula Stampede, and join us. Bring your sign, bring your outrage, and let the Riverside County know that we do not approve, we do not want these kind of people coming into our community. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. No, I'm going to stay on my soapbox. It's too fun from the look up here. Hey, listen, we have an exciting guest tonight. You know, about a month ago or so, Palm Springs, that bastion of progressivism in the Inland Empire, held a Transgender Day event, Transgender Day of Remembrance. And they had an event in the Palm Springs Pavilion, and it was well attended. They had all these booths from different agencies and organizations and stuff. And I went to every single one of them, and I talked to people. I got all kinds of swag. That was really cool. And then I met Dr. Jamie Woods. And she is with the health science. She's a health science clinical assistant professor of psychiatry. She's co-chair of the Diversity Advisory Committee at the University of California right here in Riverside. She's not somewhere up in Northern California around, on the liberal campuses up there. She's right here in the Inland Empire. And I was so taken when I met her and talked with her. She gave me a little brief bio sketch to let you know about her, and then I'm going to bring her on. She said she was originally a pharmacist, and she later went on to medical school and practiced primary care medicine for approximately 8 years. She then completed a second residency in psychiatry and is certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. This is no fly-by-night person. This is a person who has all the credentials and letters after her name. She's a licensed to practice medicine in California. It has a subspecialty certification from the American Society of Clinical Psychopharmacology. She's a full-time health science associate professor of psychiatry at UC Riverside, and she writes, I am lucky enough to call Palm Springs, California, home. And that is so true. Palm Springs is paradise. In addition, she writes, my love of teaching psychopharmacology, my interactions with our medical students and residents keeps me young. My most important teachers have been Justin and Julia Woods. She doesn't say, but I will ask her. Is that her parents? I bet she is. Your imagination fuels my aspiration. November 2017, I began to fulfill a lifelong dream of transitioning medically and surgically from male to female. I'm an unapologetic, fully out, transgender female, and my pronouns are she, they. In addition to providing state-of-the-art psychopharmacology, she has the pleasure of also providing cutting-edge, gender-affirming hormone therapy to our transgender, gender, non-deforming individuals. Dr. Woods, welcome to Lanny Sense. I am so excited and thrilled to have you on my show.
Lanny, thank you so much. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to be a conduit tonight for a very powerful message of tenacity, perseverance, and resilience and courage for our gender nonconforming and transgender individuals. Thanks again.
Well, yeah, that event where I met you was really something to see. More people. I mean, it was well attended, but I would like to have seen even more people. It was a real eye opener for people who don't know too much about transgender. And I probably know a little bit more than most, but I learned an awful lot there, and talking with you especially. So let's get into it, because I think a lot of our listeners are probably don't know much either. So let's start out with, what is transgender?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Lanny, you're cutting in and cutting out, so I didn't hear all of your question, but basically people that identify from a gender different than the gender that they were assigned at birth are considered to be transgender individuals. And I think a lot of times people get a little bit confused, because everybody has 5 intersecting identities. But for cisgender heterosexual people, they don't really know that they have 5 intersecting identities, because their identities all line up. But for those of us on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, our identities frequently don't line up. So for our listening audience, what I'd like to do, Lanny, is just take a second to kind of help our audience understand these 5 different identities, because it's going to be really important for our audience to understand that just because I'm trans doesn't predict that I'm going to like this person, or I'm going to like this sex over this sex, or something like that. These are different parallel tracks. So the first thing that I would like to talk about is our gender identity. Our gender identity is up in our brain. That's how we identify. The word transgender didn't exist in 1968 when I was in the 8th grade growing up in Nashville, Tennessee. All I knew is that I wasn't a boy. I knew I had boy parts, but I knew I didn't think like them. I didn't understand them. Nothing that they said made a lot of sense to me. So I just identified as something other than male really early growing up. Now, as we started getting more literature out there on transgender individuals, I began to realize, oh my gosh, well, they're talking about me. So, but your gender identity is on a spectrum. You can identify, I was assigned male at birth. That's another identity. So I was assigned male at birth, but I identify as female. I'm on estrogen. I've had surgery. I identify as female. So, and I don't have to have had any of those things, by the way, to identify as female. Somebody that's never had those is every bit as trans as I am. But that comes from my head. I identify as something other than male early on, and I identify as transgender female. Okay, now the next thing that we talk about, our next identity, is how we express our gender. That's our gender expression. For all my life until 63 years of age, I'm 69 now, I expressed male because I knew that I was going to have to learn how to pass as a guy. So, and I was going to have to, dress in guy clothes. That wasn't really a big issue for me or anything like that. But I had to express male. I had to enter into their conversations and wait 3 seconds and not make eye contact and say, hell yeah. Rather than talking about really, other things. So I was able to express male. Now I express female because that's more in line with my gender identity. The third thing I just mentioned a few seconds ago, and that was the biological sex that we were assigned at birth. Even that exists on a spectrum too as well. It exists as well as your identity exists on a spectrum. We have many intersex individuals where their sex assigned at birth is ambiguous. We can't really make a determination too. So that exists. Gender identity. I want to go back and say something real quickly, Lanny, about that too as well. I identify as female. However, we have many people who were assigned female at birth, about the same number as transgender women who identify as male. So they are, again, on the other end of the spectrum. We're just crossing the interstate, going one way or the other. But the biggest percentage of us, especially in Gen Z patients, these are our patients who are in college and are in medical school and doing their residency. 60% of that 5%, yes, 1 out of every 20 college students identify as a gender other than the one they were assigned at birth. Not 1 out of 100, 1 out of 5. And, 1 out of 20. 5% rather. And of that 5% that identify as a gender other than the one they were assigned at birth, 2/3 of those have rejected the binary entirely as a social construct. And that makes perfect sense to our younger generation because they simply read those textbooks going through school. But for those of us who are older, we are coming to the realization that at the end of the day, masculinity and femininity are both performative. Don't ask me to man up, but don't ask me to sit still and look pretty too as well. So for those of us who are non-binary, also known as gender non-conforming, or gender queer, then we typically go by they, them pronouns, and we basically have just thrown the binary away. If I want to present female one day, I can do that. If I want to present male another day, I can do that too as well. So the future is actually regarding transgender people becoming non-binary. Now, my fourth intersecting identity is who I want to go to bed with. I can be heterosexual. Now, being heterosexual has nothing to do with my gender identity. If I were a cisgender heterosexual man, I would be attracted to women. If I am a transgender heterosexual man, I would be attracted to women, even though I was assigned female at birth. So again, who you want to go to bed with is completely different from how you identify or how you express or your sex assigned at birth. That's on a completely different track. I can be trans, I can be bisexual, pansexual, asexual, not have any sexual desire, heterosexual, or homosexual. So that's completely different. And then finally, our last identity is, well, who would you fall in love with? Well, I can fall in love with men or women. I fell in love with many cats in my lifetime too as well. So if we can get our kind of idea, or if I can get our arms around the concept that our identity is not just one thing, it's actually 5 different things. And I think that would help us understand the concept of being transgender a little bit better.
That's very interesting, and it's not a simple little thing, is it? You know, there's the Kinsey what is it? There's the Kinsey degree of heterosexuality to homosexuality, and it's on a kind of a curve. Is that kind of the same thing with transgenderism? Is there kind of a Kinsey degree of sexuality?
Absolutely. So, for example, and then there's so many different words for sexual. You can be heterosexual, you can be homosexual, you can be bisexual, where you really don't care what. You can be pansexual, which is including being sexually attracted to non-binary people. That's becoming much more important as time goes on. All those things are totally irrespective of who I'm sexually attracted to. Bisexual, I'm attracted to both sexes. Asexual, I don't really have very much interest in sex. Demisexual just simply means that I have to have a relationship with you before I start thinking about other things. So sapiosexual means that I find intelligent people sexual too as well. So there's a lot of different words out there to describe, and we can get lost with the terminology. That's why I wanted to just kind of, while not being reductionistic, just remember how you identify. You can identify as male, female, anywhere in the middle. You can identify as agender. You can identify as not having a gender. You can identify as having both genders, bigender people. Again, they're more non-binary. So that's very, very different from how we express and who we're sexually attracted to and who we go to bed with.
Understand. Yeah, and you're right. There's a lot of terminology in here, and it can get maybe a little confusing in a way. So now, what exactly does a transgender person feel? I mean, is it as simple as that they feel they were born in the wrong body, or is it more complex than that?
Well, actually, no, it's very, very simple. I asked somebody asked me once, they said, how do you know you're transgender? And I simply looked at him and I said, well, are you right-handed or left-handed? And he said, well, I'm right-handed. And I looked at him, I said, well, how do you know? you just know, don't you?
You're right. That's right. You just automatically do things more with your right hand than your left hand. Correct.
So you don't, if you're right-handed, you don't need to convince yourself in the morning, well, which hand am I going to use today? You're not ambidextrous, you're right-handed. You just know you are. You don't need to be convinced every day or read a book to know that you're right-handed. It's just something that you just know from deep down within you. And it's the same thing with our gender identity. Although that journey to our final gender identity can take many twists and turns too as well. A lot of us transgender individuals were gay individuals, maybe gay men or lesbians, butch lesbians before they transitioned to trans masculine guys. So for a lot of us, it's a journey. Maybe we originally start off as being bisexual, or maybe we start off as being gay, then we're bisexual, and then we're thinking, well, that's just not really quite a good fit for me. Maybe I like being the submissive partner, but maybe I want to adopt more of a female role. It can change over the course. But trans guys typically know coming out of the womb. I always joke, trans girls take a little bit longer time.
But you said, a person could be, one day they could be, you could be trans. How did you put it? You said you could change every day. One day you could be predominantly female. Another day you could be predominantly male. You can't do that. Well, you can't do it with your right hand and left hand. You can't say one day I'm going to be right-handed and the next day I'm going to be left-handed.
And I think that's one of the things, Lanny, that separate our non-binary people from our transgender individuals too, because they make a decision in many cases to say, look, I'm not subscribing to this gender identity social construct that you've prepared for me. I don't want to perform any one of those kinds of things. I just want to be known. If I'm non-binary, I just want to be known as Jamie. I just want to be known as not Mr. Jamie, Miss Jamie, just Jamie. So that's more of a cognitive kind of conclusion that people come to. After having said that, if you're on the binary end of it, if you're a transgender man or transgender woman, you just know. You just you can't explain it. How can you explain being right-handed? You just are.
Very true. Very true. So, what is the process of a person of transitioning? They feel they want it. They just don't feel they're in the right body. What do they do?
It's a great question, Lanny. I do want to spend a couple of seconds talking about that too as well.
Because you can spend a couple minutes if you like on it. Okay.
Thanks. Transgender people may seek any number of gender-affirming interventions, including hormone therapy, including surgery, electrolysis, voice therapy, breast augmentation surgery, breast reduction surgery for trans guys. They can tracheal shaves, facial feminization surgery. They can seek all of those, or they can seek none at all. So there's a lot of ways to come into it. So what I do when I see somebody that identifies as trans, then I'll ask them, well, what are your individual transition goals? What does transition look like for you? Because it's not a binary anymore. It's not. And sometimes it's reductionistic, especially if we go to some endocrinologists, which are great with hormones, but they are still kind of getting their arms around non-binary. They're not, well, what is this? Because they treat brittle diabetes. They're more involved with the hormone. But so they say, oh, you're a man that wants to be a woman, or you're a woman that wants to be a man. Well, fully a third of my patients don't want to be either, but they have individual transition goals, Lanny. I have one patient, for example, that was assigned male at birth. They want some increased emotional reactivity, but they don't want to lose their ability to have male orgasms and male erections. So they're not on a testosterone blocker, but I did go ahead and add some estrogen to them so that they can have some increased emotional reactivity that meets their individual transition goals for them. I also have another patient. They were assigned female at birth. Their individual transition goals include some facial hair, their voice dropping a little bit. They want top surgery, but they don't want the complete kind of testosterone flooding of the brain that transgender guys get. So they're microdosing their testosterone to their individual goals. So the first thing that really the person should ask when we evaluate the transgender individuals is, what does transition look like for you? What's your goal? What do you want to look like at the end of your transition, and then kind of go from there.
It's interesting. You talked about, it seems like medicine plays a large role in the transitioning. Hi, who's the gentleman?
So Alan's my friend. He's coming in today. He's kind of watching the interview with your permission.
Hi, Al. Welcome to Lanny Sense. We're glad to have you join us. Well, we can't hear you, Al. That's okay.
Yeah, I think your microphone's off. But anyway, Lanny, what was the question that you were asking again?
Yeah. So it seems to me that you said there's always been transgender people, hasn't there? I mean, it's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, we've always been king's concubines and queen's lovers.
What did transgender people do? I mean, so much of what you talked about just now was medicine, giving hormones, surgery, doing certain kinds of things. This is only stuff that can be done relatively recently. What did transgender people do before then?
Well, there were eunuchs back in the day, and these were people assigned male at birth who, for one reason or another, had an orchiectomy, or the removals of their testicles. From a hormonal perspective, those individuals actually are non-binary. They really are not male or female, and they've been around for a very, very long time. But they, you can even go back farther than that too as well. Joan of Arc today would be coming in requesting testosterone. So she was a total, and I'm going to say the word, she was a total badass in 1400, and she'd be awesome today too as well. Transgender individuals today are very fortunate because if their insurance and everything works well for them, they have the ability to actually achieve some goals that our previous transgender individuals were just never able to realize for themselves. So even though we're the center of the hurricane right now, and sometimes we feel like that we're in the crosshairs of the rifle sight, which can sometimes be literally true as well as figuratively true as well, we still have profound advantages that a lot of our transgender predecessors didn't have available to them.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody nowadays, because of modern medicine, has all kinds of advantages that people didn't have not too long ago. So, and transgender people are just one of these groups of people that has benefited from modern medical science. So, okay. So, but you mentioned about being in the eye shot, being lined up in the eyes of a gun and all this kind of stuff. And transgenderism is become politically very, very controversial. It is part of the culture wars. You notice that when I was talking at the beginning of the show about this IE family pack wanting to take control of the school boards here in Riverside County, one of the things what they were objecting to about modern day schools was what it was transgenderism encouraged. They say that's what's going on in our schools nowadays. Transgenderism encouraged, along with forced LGBTQ acceptance. Forced LGBTQ acceptance. So, yes, transgender people are really in the crosshairs, and the Republican Party is really out to get you, and they are passing all kinds of laws against transgender, especially for providing care to transgender children. And they fixate on two things especially. First of all is bathrooms. They're so worried about a person, they actually believe that a man is going to undergo transitioning in order to be able to go into a woman's bathroom and ogle the women. I mean, this is nonsense. How do you counter people who sit there and have this bathroom fixation about transgender people?
Well, the first thing that we need to realize is that soccer moms vote. Okay? Soccer moms are a very big voting bloc in this country. And if the Republicans, which were losing conventions and they were losing seats, and they had to find something that they could attach something to. And they found that soccer moms really didn't know very much about transgender individuals, but they don't know if they were really sure that they wanted their kids really associated with those people. So they latched on to it. We're political football. I'm a boogeyman. And as a physician who actually does gender affirming hormone therapy, I'm in a much, even as a white transgender woman, I'm 49 times more likely to get killed than a white cisgender woman my age. But then if I'm a doctor that's actually prescribing these things, it's a very scary environment. And that's one of the reasons why I was forced to leave Tennessee 4 years ago too, as well. It's because my physical safety was threatened there. So I don't know. We're just in the middle of a political crosshairs right now. We're a political football. They've attached. I don't encourage, but, instead of them yelling, you're encouraging transgenderism. You know what we really do? We're not discouraging transgenderism.
That's right.
Maybe it should be their choice. Maybe it should, kids, and, it's really interesting. Because, I don't groom kids. I try to talk them out of it. They need to convince me that they've given a lot of thought about this. When a kid comes in, how long have you known? Is puberty imminent? What do their parents say? Are they out at school? Are you out to your friends? Well, if not, why not? What's your support system? We have a lot of things that we evaluate when we evaluate the transgender teen. And that's really where they're focusing most of their efforts, is because we're grooming them and they have to protect their kids from this, new onslaught of which, and everything like that too as well. But let me give you a couple of examples about how I evaluate a transgender teen, because they really are in the center of the hurricane right now. So let's say I have a 12-year-old and they're coming in and they're identifying as a transgender female, but they're not really sure. I mean, they've just come to that decision in a year, and you got to be 16 before you realize that surgery is, the permanent implications, for normal, adolescent development. So do they really understand that this is permanent? And who are you out to? And maybe you're out to one parent, but you're afraid to come out to the other parent, and you're definitely going to this Christian school, so they're not out or something. I'm hearing a lot of red flags, Lanny, in a situation like that. So in a situation like that, you know what? Let's buy some time. And that's where puberty blockers come in. All they do is just delay puberty. That's all they do. They delay male puberty. They delay female puberty. They just delay puberty. And what it does is it buys us time, because in a year, a lot of these kids have decided, you know what, I'm not trans, or maybe I'm kind of more trans feminine, but not to the degree that I want to do anything about it, or something like that. A year is a lifetime for a 12-year-old. And if we can buy a year or two so that they can have a better idea that if they are trans, now they know they're trans. And now they've started doing some things, to kind of help that transition. So that's one situation where I'd push for puberty blockers in a situation, because you don't want that little girl to go through male puberty, if it turns out that really is what she's decided, but we're not really sure that's what she's decided. So we're buying time with the puberty blockers. Now, let me give you a different scenario. Jazz Jennings, what if she walked into my office and she was 12 years old? Well, for our audience, Jazz Jennings is like a 23 or 24-year-old transgender woman. Her whole life has been documented. I think it was on Oxygen, or maybe it was Lifetime TV. She was walking around in her mermaid outfit when she was 3 years old. And she has 2 affirming patients. So that was parents. So that was never an issue. She's been out. She's been Jazz to everybody that knows her whole life. She's out at school. She's out. There's no way in the world I'm going to make that little girl go through male puberty. That is wrong. It's really going to increase her suicidal ideations. So when we have that kind of scenario, we need to go ahead and move forward. And I'm sorry if some groups don't like it, but it's the right medical decision to be made. And another thing is, don't take the medical decision making out of me in the patient's hands. Okay? Please don't do that. Don't do that whether you're considering a woman's sovereign right to her own body, or the right that I have as a doctor with my patient too as well. So anyway, that's a little aside right there. So, in one scenario, I'm delaying, and another scenario, I'm not. So what do their parents say? Maybe you're 16 years old. You've only been out for a year or something like that. You're not really sure. And you got one parent that's affirming, but dad wants his little trans girl to grow up to be a male football player. And there's just no way in the world these people are going to come in and, and all this kind of stuff. And now you've got parents fighting over a minor. And that's a very, very difficult situation. Yeah. But if you're 16 and you don't know for a year, what's the use? What's the harm in waiting? What's the harm in waiting? Absolutely. Things are kind of stable for you right now. If things get rocky, we can always reevaluate the situation. If you're 17, wait a year. If you're sure at that point in time, well, guess what? Unless mom and dad are paying for your tuition, it's not going to be their decision to make. Also, are you out at school? Are you out to friends? Well, if you're not, I need to know why not. Because, I always tell my trans girls, until you walk out there in a skirt and stiletto heels, you don't really know. And of course, I'm speaking broadly here, obviously, but you don't really know what it's like. You don't know what those non-affirming people are going to lose friends. And the young trans person is going to lose friends. Their parents are going to lose friends too, as well. When one individual transitions, the whole family transitions.
Okay, well, now I want to get to the thing that was headlining this interview with you. And you kept referring to transgenders as a political football. And I want to get into football because one of the other big bugaboos is transgender men who transgender to women and playing in sports. The sports thing mainly seems to center specifically on men transitioning to women and not women transitioning to men. And that's probably because there is anatomical differences that makes males more likely to have musculature and a skeletal framework to excel in most sports. We have sexual dimorphism in animals, and this is especially true in mammals and especially true in primates. The male is generally bigger and stronger than the female, which evolutionary-wise was very useful because the males protected the females who are bearing the young. So the question we have here is are transgender males who transition to females, is it going to be unfair to cisgender females in the sport?
Well, the answer is really simple. The answer, Lanny, is no and yes. So allow me a couple of minutes to elaborate
all the minutes you need until 8 o'clock.
Okay, I think it sounds good. We can certainly do this in that amount of time. You know what? Studies have shown, and a recent study that was actually funded by the International Olympic Committee, they have no skin in the game here. They're not it's not the Republican International Olympic Committee. It's not the Democratic International. It's not the Evangelical IOC. It's the IOC. And they really want to know what the final answer was. They actually commandeered a small study, but it was published within the past month. But what it does is underscores what we already know, that you can believe what you want to, but this is what the science shows, is that if for example, I'm a transgender female, okay? So if I keep my testosterone level down below 50 nanograms per deciliter, because that's where that's where normal girls live their whole life, then and if I keep it down there for 2 years, there is no muscular advantage. I'm sorry. You can believe what you want to believe. There is just no muscular advantage. However, there still remains a skeletal advantage. Leah Thomas is a swimmer. She swam for Penn University. Leah Thomas is 6'4" tall. She's a trans girl. When she transitioned over to estrogen, her estrogen levels were down below cisgender women. But Leah Thomas is still 6'4". And if you're swimming a 50-meter dash to the other end of the pool for a gold medal, these races are determined by 5 millimeters, 5 centimeters, 2 inches or less in many cases. So there has to be some way to, like we do in golf, have a handicap for that trans girl whose height is way outside the 95th percentile. Same thing for our women's basketball team too as well. If you transition but you were 6'7", Well, other than Brittany Griner, how many cis girls? So there has to be some accounting for that too as well. Also, when you're looking at distance races too as well, people that were assigned male at birth have larger rib cages. They have greater oxygen carrying capacity. And if you're running a marathon or a 10,000 meter race, it's really how much oxygen can you get to your muscles in a period of time. It's about how much oxygen you can deliver. Well, they've got larger rib cages. They're not going to shrink if we transition. So we're going to have to figure out, and they're very bright minds that can figure out whatever that handicap is going to be. But I do want to mention one thing, and I do want to kind of quote this IOC study. And what they did, small study, about 20 cis men. These were just regular men that were assigned, male at birth. And they had 12 trans guys that they wanted to compare against. So they compared cis guys against trans guys too as well. It wasn't just the girls too. They wanted to see what the effect was on the transgender men. So, and then they had about 24 trans girls and about 24 cis girls. Cis girls, it's just girls, not trans. They were assigned female at birth and they expressed female and they identify as female and everything's good right there. So what they did, they measured 5 outcomes. They measured hand grip strength, which is a measure of upper body strength. Then they measured jump height, which is a measure, obviously, of lower body strength. And they measured cardiac output and lung efficiency too as well. The transgender woman, their estrogen levels were equal, their testosterone levels were equal. They were on this for at least a year. They had greater grip strength. It wasn't remarkable. It was about 10% more, but that's significant. And that shows that trans girls' upper bodies are actually maybe a little bit stronger than cis girls. But here's the shocking part. When they measured lower body strength, the cis girls actually outperformed the trans girls, and it was statistically significant, which means it would be very reproducible if the study were enlarged to a larger size too as well. And they had better cardiac output than we did. That's called MVO2, or how much oxygen you can pump into your body in a given amount of time. Their hearts were much more efficient and much stronger at delivering oxygen than transgender women's too as well. And their forced vital capacity ratio, which is how fast you can blow out the air in your lungs, really important if you're breathing fast and you're running a marathon or a 10K. Again, the cis girls actually had an advantage over the trans girls. So in 4 of the 5 metrics, I'm afraid the trans girls were at the disadvantage here, not the cis girls. What does that all eventually mean? It means that we need to take a very nuanced approach into how we address this. But to simply say, yes, they are, or no, they are not, is very reductionistic, and it doesn't really take into consideration all the different perspectives that are out there. So I think that right now the story is yet to be determined fully, but it looks like that for the most part, the trans girls, other than being maybe exceptionally tall or having greater, bigger rib cages, don't really have a lot of advantages out there over cis girls. Now, if that data is actually going to get out there, I don't know if it is, Lanny, because, everybody is going to, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. So everybody is probably going to twist it to their, individual, agendas that they want to pursue. But it's a very, very valid question. And if my transgender people are not fully satisfied with that, and if my cisgender people are not fully satisfied with that, then I'm satisfied with it.
Then you're satisfied. Well, what about the idea of you have cisgender teams, male, cisgender, female, and then you have trans teams?
Well, you could do that. You could separate them out. We could, be like the Special Olympics, and you could have one trans team, playing another trans team. That certainly is a solution to it. I think it's kind of, creating an issue that might not be there. Maybe, 4 or 5 more years of research will better be able to determine, what kind of differences where those differences are located at. Why are there differences? And so that if transgender women have an advantage, certainly in the 50-meter dash, if you're 64 or 6'4" in the water, we have to account for that. But if the science and the data shows to us that there is no difference, maybe in that particular sport or something like that, then you know what? People need to follow the science, which is hard for a significant population percentage of us to do, but that's the best data that we have so far.
And following the science usually always comes out correctly, because that's what science does. It finds out what is true. It's our arbiter of truth nowadays. We don't turn to some holy man or something like that. We have science that determines, and we live, our lives are wrapped up from the moment we wake up in the morning till we go to bed at night, and even while we're asleep, our lives are wrapped up with science. I always talk about how I have these Christians that come to my front door, and they talk to me, and they want me to meet Jesus and all this stuff. And I say, listen, I've got a little experiment I want you to make. I said, I want you to, for one day, just forsake religion. Say, there is no God, and see how your life changes. And then I want you for 1 hour to forsake science and see how your life functions for just 1 hour without science. Well, they walk away and leave me alone. Hey, listen.
I think that's a very good response. And there are going to be people that are out there and they're forsaking science, and their kids are developing measles at a rate we haven't seen in 100 years. And by the way, those moms are also seeing a big increase in rubella too as well, because they're not following the science. And we're seeing a dramatic increase in diphtheria and tetanus, which we haven't seen in over 100 years, because we have a group of people out there that nobody's going to tell them anything, certainly not science. They're going to believe what they want to believe. And, the kids are paying the price for that.
Absolutely true. So another thing real quickly, all right, you've mentioned it briefly, and I've read sometimes about people who transition and are in the process of transition, and then they decided this isn't for me.
Right.
Is transitioning a one-way street, or can you go back?
You can absolutely. We try to predict as best we can who is at high risk of detransitioning. Certainly, in my previous example, the 12-year-old that really, wasn't really sure, but they're up against puberty or something like that. That group of kids is going to be, pretty significant percentage of those. The data, again, the science shows that they're going to be at high risk for detransitioning. So the key is to be able to kind of predict who is not going to want to detransition, because as I tell my trans girls, once they start growing and you stop taking estrogen, they're not going to shrink, right? So it's going to be permanent. The data shows that about 11% of transgender women revert back to their original sex. When it was looked at and more closely in a post hoc analysis, it was found out that the majority of those trans women who detransitioned just simply detransitioned because couldn't get their hormones anymore, or they lost their insurance too as well. However, there is transgender regret. It is very, very real. And that's why I continue to ask my patients really early on, are you sure you still want to do this? Is this something that is still making sense for you to do that? A much smaller percentage of trans men detransition. First of all, testosterone is dirt cheap. You can actually buy injectable testosterone for cheaper than the syringes. So the insurance thing kind of drops out of it. And plus, transgender men, many of them go through the butch lesbian phase, but it's almost always the same sentence you hear. I tried that, but I didn't feel comfortable wearing, dresses or Mary Jane's. And even with the butch lesbian presentation, it just didn't feel right. They have a much lower risk of detransitioning. And when they do, it's typically because they get pressure from outside influences.
Is there any kind of positive or negative health effects from transitioning?
Yes, there's a really positive mental health benefit. First of all, transgender individuals, 2 out of 5 of them will attempt suicide at some point in their life. That's one of the highest suicide attempt rates, Lanny, that we have in psychiatry. There are very few psychiatric illnesses that have higher suicide attempt rates. So we know that if we give gender-affirming hormone care to these individuals, that their suicidal ideations go down a great deal, depending on whatever gender-affirming hormone care is for that individual. If they get it, they become less suicidal. So there's very definitely health benefits as well as mental health benefits too as well. I don't want to draw my own example because it's not about me, but I lived my whole life with a 10-year Framingham risk ratio of having a heart attack of less than 1%. I was that person that had the low blood sugar, the low heart rate, who was always exercising, never overweight, everything, cholesterol was low. I was the last person in the world. But I had a massive heart attack when I was 60 years old. So what the heck was going on? Well, for me, I was living a double life. That's what I was doing. And it was taking a cumulative toll on me over the period of my lifetime too as well. So definitely being able to be authentic and true to yourself is going to be, actually, the studies have been done. Those folks just live longer. That, they have more resiliency because of that. And that, transitions into improved longevity too as well. So there are definitely medical benefits as well as mental health benefits for our people who transition.
So taking these drugs, hormones and this kind of stuff doesn't have any, let's say, increased risk of cancer or anything like that?
No, that's not a conclusion that you would draw from what we talked about. We know that estrogen-like products have been associated with a small but statistically significantly increased risk of breast cancer. But when you actually look at the data where that was shown, we weren't even using human estrogens. That was back in the days where we're using artificial and pregnant horse mare urine for estrogen and a lot of different things. Since we have been using the bioidentical hormones, we haven't really seen, and that's been for the past 20 years, we really haven't seen that statistically significantly increased risk. I make the point of giving my patients the transdermal or patches if they will use those, because you get the same blood levels for 1/50th the dose of estradiol that they would take by mouth. So there's no data that shows that there is an increased risk. After having said that, I want my patients, and I tell them when I start them, you're going to do the research and you're going to tell me what the side effects of estrogen and what this, is going to be, and what are the side effects of going down on testosterone, and what's the side effects of this drug, and what's the side effects of this testosterone blocker. And when they've convinced me that they can teach me, then they know. If you can teach, then you know. And so they have a very good idea of what's going forward for them. Really, for the trans girls, it's breast cancer, but it's also blood clots too as well. Especially high levels of estrogen can increase our risk for blood clots. Again, we haven't seen it with the bioidentical hormones, but it's out there. And I always make sure my patients understand 1 out of 9 girls are going to develop breast cancer anyway. Yeah. So, it's a real risk out there. And after 5 years, you're going to be going for your mammogram.
We're going to have to wrap this up, Dr. Woods. I really appreciate you taking the time. There's these crazy things where they're passing laws to make it difficult to transition for transgenders. All kinds of discriminatory laws are being passed. People have to know the kind of information that you provided here today. If people have the chance to learn this kind of stuff, maybe they'll take a more rational and reasonable approach to all this kind of stuff. So I want to thank you for joining us. Real quickly, if somebody wants more information about it, where should they turn to?
Well, we accept most commercial insurances at the University of California, Riverside, and I'd be delighted to participate in your gender-affirming hormone care if it appears that that's actually the wise thing to do. So they can become patients in the gender-affirming hormone care clinic that we're running at UC Riverside. If you just want to learn more about it, then, or if you have some questions or something like that, then what you can do is you can kind of, I think what we should do, actually, Lanny, is if we feel like that there is a significant number of questions and if this has raised a spark, we can come back for a second session.
Hey, that would be wonderful. Thank you. We got to wrap it up. We got like 30 seconds left. So, hey, if you really like this show, stick around for the 8 o'clock show. You can hear it all over again. We want to mention our guest next week on Tuesday, May 21st is going to be Professor Whitty from Michigan State University. He's going to be talking about election 2024 and how the cannabis vote is going to make a big, big difference. That's here on Lanny Sense, the show that is the most controversial show here on KCAA Radio. Thank you. Good night. Have a good time. And please tell your friends, Lanny Sense, every Tuesday, 7 p.m.
NBC News on KCAA Loma Linda.